Thank you for the opportunity to share with you today. Those of you who I've met before will know that I do environmental economics with NIWA, but used to be with the regional organisations where I was doing economics as well. And most people don't get very excited about economics, and that's okay. So first up, well done for actually joining the presentation. That is a huge achievement for anyone who doesn't do economics. God bless you. And secondly, this is the cheats way around valuation. Okay, so I just want to give you a little insight into one of the ways to do some environmental valuation if the stuff that you're doing in your fisheries or your ministries actually requires some kind of monetary representation of the values that your natural resources are bringing. So, okay, I'm going to make sure this works. Okay, so I have a few topics that I just want to cover. We're doing this very light on, okay? This is not heavy stuff, or at least I hope it's not going to be heavy stuff. So I just want to touch base quickly on why we do environmental valuation. I assume that you're all completely comfortable with the need for that, so I won't take long. What is it that we want to know? And how evaluation's done. And this is important because when I show you the cheats way of doing the evaluations, we're actually going to ride on the coattails of the people who've actually done the valuations before. So it's good to have a sense of how they actually approached valuation. And then I want to talk about where we get the information and talk about existing databases of other people's values. Okay, so environmental valuation. Why do we care? Why do we care? Okay, so I think that we're probably all on the same page that environmental services and the things that they give to us, like fish or like clean water or protecting of our coastlines, all of these services don't have a monetary value on, and it's quite easy for them to get overlooked when there are assessments of whether or not to do certain developments. So it can be really helpful to be able to express the value of the environmental goods and services that we're getting so that they don't get overlooked. And so that when we do development, we're not doing so at the expense of critical services that we get from the environment. So that's the first reason. We want to make sure that we're including it in assessments so that we can have sustainable development, not development at all costs. And the second thing is that as part of that, we obviously want to make sure that people are aware of what they're getting from the environment and why it's important and what it is that they're trying to protect. Because generally speaking, if we don't value something, it doesn't get protected. So what is it that we're going to value? Generally speaking, when we're trying to put a value on the environment, we are looking at costs. So what are the sacrifices that we make as a community in order to do some kind of development? What are we losing in order to get gains? So are we losing environmental quality? Are we going to lose some of our fish stocks because things are being overused? Are we going to destroy any of our natural habitats? What is it that we give up in order to make progress? And the second thing that we look at is benefits. How are we better off? Okay, so in what way do the investments or changes that we make improve our well-being? That might be commercially, it might be emotionally, it might be spiritually, it might be in terms of food inside our tummies. So we are looking at the benefits or the satisfaction or the improvement in welfare that we can get. So this is normally what we're interested in valuing from an economic perspective. And when we talk about environmental costs and benefits, there's actually quite a lot of different types. So we generally have two broad groups of benefits and costs that we're looking at. You can see on the screen here, I've got a box on use values. Now, use values are basically the benefits or the experiences that we get from natural resources where we are actively engaging with the natural resource to benefit from it. So we might be consuming fish, getting timber from trees, extracting minerals, using the sands, or recreating on the beach, hanging out with our families, having a swim. And then we have indirect values. So these are the things that we benefit from the natural world from but we don't actually have to do anything to make that happen. So that's in the coastal environment, that's particularly things like, say, coastal protection from mangroves or from coral reefs, or the carbon sequestration that we get from seagrasses, contributions to climatic control. So lots of things that we benefit from either actively or because the environment's doing its work. And then over here we have non-use values, and these are the intangible benefits that we get from the natural world. So option values refers to the fact that we might not be using stuff right now, but at some point in the future we want to have the right to. So we don't necessarily want to destroy all of our coral reefs that might not be doing a great deal because we might need them in the future, or because there might be something in there that we can value. And then we have existence values, the belief that the natural world has a right to continue unspoiled anyway. So all of these types of values make us potentially better off. And this is what we call the total economic value of environmental resources. So we might be trying to capture any or all of these environmental values from the natural world. How do we value? When you are doing your work for your organizations, you will quite often be asked about, well, what is the value of this resource and why should we be protecting it when we can use it for other purposes? There are a couple of general approaches to valuing the environment. The most straightforward one is what's called revealed preference behavior, okay, or revealed preference approaches. And that's basically looking at what people do in the real world which relates to the natural resources and shows you unintentionally how much they value them. So I've got a little image here of some of the falaise at Lalamanu. And what we could do as economists is actually look at, well, how much do people spend in order to enjoy the coastal environment around Lalamanu? Well, they fly in, they use fuel to drive in, they spend money to rent out the falaise, they spend money on other things, and the amount of money that people spend, even unconsciously, on accessing these lovely places reveals how much they value, in a simple way, those areas. We've also got a little thing of the tuna from Solomon's here. Another way that we can look at how some values for the natural resources are revealed is how much we spend on substitute products. So if we can't go and do subsistence fishing within the reef, we might actually then be spending money on substitutes like canned tuna or canned mackerel, corned beef, whatever it is. So these values give us an indication of the magnitude of importance that people have. It doesn't actually accurately express all of the meaning behind them, but gives us an indication. This is revealed preference approaches. The alternative is to ask people directly how important environmental goods and services are to them. And we have very specific techniques for doing this. We don't just go up to somebody and say, oh, how much do you value your coral reef, or how much do you value your beach? We don't do that because that would be strange and insulting. But what we can do is consider different bundles of the environment. So maybe clean water and maybe nice beaches, and compare that to how people value clean water and access to something else, and then tease out the values in between. So we can have a couple of ways, a couple of broad approaches to trying to value the environment. And what this actually translates into is this massive list of different approaches to valuing environmental amenities or attributes. I'm not going to go through them all, but I want to give you some examples here. Replacement costs. When we have mangroves along the coastline, mangroves are very important for diffusing wave energy. So when we have a storm surge, if you have mangroves along the coastline, it will actually lessen the damage. If we don't have mangroves, we might actually have to replace the services that they give us in terms of defending our coastline by putting in things like revetments or seawalls. The amount of money that we have to spend to replace those services gives us an indication of the values that those mangroves are giving to us. I already talked about travel costs. the amount of money that people spend in order to get to a place to enjoy the environmental amenities it gives us an indication of some of the values that they attribute to it. They wouldn't spend the money if they didn't think it was worthwhile. So there's some different ways that we can investigate the magnitude of costs from the natural world. But as you can see, we have lots and lots and lots. Now, how can we do it? Now you can do it yourself. And I've got to tell you, it's a lot of work. But it's great. It's very liberating. It's very educational. A lot of these methods are quite mathematically complex. If you're into maths, good on you. Come and work with us. That would be great. But if you don't want to do it yourself because it's something that's only going to happen once in a while, you don't want to have staff who are tied up with that, you can obviously go out to consultancies, or you can have a look and see what other people have done in similar situations before, and perhaps borrow and adapt the values that they generate to give you an indication of the scale of the benefits of environmental resources and the services that they produce. Now, this particular approach is called benefits transfer. It could equally be called cheating, or riding on the coattails of other people, standing on the shoulders of great people. So it's basically about looking at who has done what before and seeing if that's going to be useful for us and help us better understand what it is we are dealing with. So when we talk about the work that other people have done in valuing the environment, there are lots of databases of environmental valuations globally. They're all over the place, really. There's just heaps of them. What I did was I had a look around to see which databases of environmental valuations might be useful for the Pacific. And I've come up with 4 here, but I'm sure that there's plenty more. But these are good places to start. So you can see on the slide in front of you, this first database, EVRI, the Environmental Valuation Reference Inventory, looks at the values of different environmental attributes, and particularly the values that they give us in terms of improving people's physical health, because that's really important. The TEEB, or the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, is also a global database. This is a huge database of the different estimates that people have made for, you can see here, wetlands and coral reefs and freshwater, tropical forests. Now, these are really great databases. When you go in, they tend to just be Excel. So I'll show you, I'll give you a little look in a minute. You can go in and it will say where was valued, how it was valued, what the value is, say per hectare or per meter or whatever it is of the attribute. You do actually, they're all free. You do have to create an identity in order to get into these first ones. So you have to go in, create a little identity and a password, and then you can just go in and have a crawl around. These other 2 databases that I've put in here, you can just go in. They're just easy. You just click on them and it'll take you straight to the Excel spreadsheets. So the Globe Fouling Partnerships one is actually specifically a marine database. So the valuations of the effects of invasive aquatic species and the value or the benefits of actually mitigating or trying to manage the invasive species. And the Ecosystem Services Valuation Database, which is probably one of the first global ones, is basically all kinds of economic services, like ecosystem services. So if you were to click onto any of these links, and you will actually have the slides for this later on if you need these, if you were to click onto them, what does the database look like? Well, this is an extract from the TEEB. This is the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity. And I just did some little circling here of work that has been done in Fiji and French Polynesia. So you can see that in these particular examples, we've got valuations done of mangroves and what mangroves were giving to us in terms of ensuring that we have ongoing access to fish. This is done in Fiji. And if you go to the side here, sorry, I just have to move my screen, you can see that you're anywhere between 150 and like 1100 or whatever it is per hectare in US dollars. Now, you can't just go and take those values and plug them into your development plans. I'll come to that in a minute. But you can see that these are quite simple Excel spreadsheets to have a look around. Maybe you're interested in the values of coral reefs. We've got a whole bunch here for French Polynesia, and you can see again that they're indicative values, estimates of how much these are worth at the study sites that were done. Now, I want you to have a look at the valuation method. I'm showing you a way to use what we call the benefits transfer method. So basically borrowing other people's valuations. But you can see here we have some direct valuations, some replacement costs. So if we're talking about coral reefs are really good at defending the coastline and reducing the overwash. So you can see we've got a value here about replacement costs. If we didn't have the coral reefs, what would we have to do? We'd have to put in a seawall. So these databases are very helpful for telling us not just what the values are, but how they were actually estimated. I wanted to draw particular attention to those of you in the marine space to the IMO database. This is a glow fouling, which is basically a database on values associated with invasive marine species and the benefits of actually treating them. So this is particularly for those of you who are a wee bit fishy. This is what the database looks like. Again, it's just all in Excel. It shows you, this gives you the title of the study. It tells you what was being valued, and it will come up with values of harm and the benefits to be saved, the savings avoided from actually treating invasive aquatic species. There you go. Now, all of these databases normally have links to the source studies, so you can go in and have a look around and see if they actually are of any use to you. You can also normally sort them by topic. So if you're concerned more about seagrass than you are about coral reefs, or you're concerned about forests, you can click on them and sort all the data. Now, do we really want to do this? There are some basic survival strategies if we are wanting to use the work of others. Okay, the first thing is, wherever possible, it's really, really good to look at home first to try and see, are there already any valuation studies that have been done in your country? And this is because all countries are very, very different. Okay, what we've got in terms of the amount that people value in America is going to be very different to what they're valuing, say, in Samoa or Tonga. Okay, so always look home first. And then if you are looking, are the systems similar? Okay, we want to make sure that whatever it is that we're valuing or that we're borrowing the values of is actually representative of what we are getting, what your country is getting out of it. So if you're concerned about the coastal protection values of coral reefs, you're looking for the coastal protections of coral reefs. You are not looking at the coastal protection from mangroves or seagrass. You're going like for like. There are, depending on who you are, some rules that some agencies have put out there for when you can consider using benefits transfer, when to use the values in the database. The IMO, the International Maritime Organization, has a whole bunch of rules. It's a bit like being told off by your mother. Don't do this, do that, put that down, go away, wash your hands. So standard things are try and keep it like for like. If your country is not terribly wealthy, if you're looking at values from very wealthy countries, you need to take it with a grain of salt. Okay, and I'll tell you how to manage that in a wee bit in a minute. The areas have to have very similar uses. The intensity of use needs to be similar, and try not to mix up different types of ecosystems. So don't sit there and say, oh, well, we can use the value of ecosystems from Norway for Palau. I mean, it's common sense stuff. So how do we know when it makes sense? We need to have a think about how similar our sites are. So you have the site that you're interested in. You are looking at a database of other people's values. Not all places are the same. Not all markets are the same. So when we value things, some of the values that are generated from other studies might include things like lots and lots of taxes for use in the area. If you're spending lots of money on taxes, it's going to inflate the value of a particular ecosystem. And if your area doesn't have taxes on the use of those ecosystems, so it's just free for people to go in and out, you're going to have quite a difference in the values. So we have to have a way to manage that. We have to remove the taxes. Or if things are made cheaper because there are lots of subsidies, we'll actually have to accommodate that because it will make it look like it's cheaper than it really is. We need to make sure that all of the values that we have are all in the same time. So if you've got a study from 1974, which says that the value of coral reefs is $10 a hectare, 1974, it was a long time ago. We need to bring everything into today's values. If we are using studies from other countries, once we've brought them to today's values, we need to have them converted into our currency. And then we have to think about who has more money, who has more power than us, or who has less power than us. And I want to show you an example of how this might work. I have a made-up case study here of a magical seaweed in country X from 2018, a study which says that this particular seaweed is worth about $20 a hectare. Okay, so what would we do? First thing, we turn it into present day values. So 2018 was 7 years ago. There's lots happened in 7 years. Okay, there's been quite a lot of inflation. There's been a lot of changes in the world markets. You go to your local treasury or national banks and you will find consumer price indexes, and it shows you how much the inflation is each year, and you can use that information to bring old values up to the present day. So I've said for the purposes of this study that $20 in 2018 is worth about 25 now. This is a mythical one. It's actually based on actual exchange rates from a invisible country that I'm not going to mention, but it's just an example. Now, if I was in Samoa and I was wanting to use that, I would then need to convert that $25 into tala. Now, if you ever travel, you would know about database sites like Oanda or other currency exchange rates, and you just go in, you plug in $25. I want to change it to tala, and it tells me in this case that that's worth 39 tala. Now, my mythical site of origin country is quite wealthy. I'm assuming that it's that per capita, each person is represented by GDP, that's national earnings, of approaching 9,000 a year, which is twice that we have for Samoa. So that means that these people on the whole as a nation have twice as much disposable income or income to spend on wanting to protect the seaweeds. If you don't have a lot of money, it's very hard to feel like you value something right now. There used to be a saying in Australia about you can't be in the green if you're in the red. If you're in debt, you can't afford to worry about the environment. The more money you have, the more you can afford to focus on those things. So if this particular original site, if the people in the country there have a much higher GDP than your country, then you see by how much. In this case, it's worth twice as much. They have twice as much money, or Samoa only has half as much money. So we halve the value. Now, this is a very simple way of trying to reflect the purchasing power or wealth of different countries so that we can transfer those values that are already published to our own countries. It is a heroic assumption, and there are lots of other ways to do it, but I wanted to give you a feel for one way to do this. And if you go to the glow fouling database, that's the one on invasive aquatic species, they have little broken down examples for you to have a look at. And it's great, actually. And I say this because I helped write it. But it's very helpful to actually have examples. Now, at the end of the day, when we're borrowing other people's values and modifying them to suit our natural context, we need to do a sanity check. The numbers that we have How do they really stack up? If we are coming up with really, really massive values for our environment, that can be great, but it can also be quite dangerous because it can raise skepticism in people. So standard things we might do are say, well, what is the total value of the amenity that we are looking at? How does that compare to GDP? How does that compare to the amount of earnings in our region? Does it stack up? Does it make sense? And this is really important because there have been casualties at the feet of environmental valuation in the past. A million years ago, I used to work in Australia as a public servant. I was a fisheries economist back then. And there was an agency called the Resource Assessment Commission. And the Resource Assessment Commission was a big federal agency that conducted inquiries into three major environmental issues. There was mining, there was forestry and timber, and then there was the management of the coastal zone. The results included environmental valuations of these resources, and they were highly controversial. A lot of people didn't want to hear about the value of the environment. They just wanted to go and mine up the areas. But there were also questions about how it was done and how can these numbers be so big? Some of these numbers are bigger than an entire industry. And it may have nothing to do with it. But I just want you to know that the Resource Assessment Commission was closed after only 4 years. You have to think about how realistic the numbers seem at the end of it. And if they seem a bit heroic, then you treat them as if they're heroic. But it gives you a start. Now, if you want to talk further about the details of valuation, myself and Zoe, who works at NEWA as well as an environmental economist, we're always available for you to write to us. And I just thought I'd give a quick plug here that as well as talking about environmental valuations and economics, NEWA actually does a whole swathe of other work in the Pacific, including stuff like blue carbon work, oceans monitoring, capacity building, and so on. So just have to put that out there from a corporate perspective. So that is me. I feel like I've completely just thrown a whole bunch of stuff at you. If you are still listening and are not asleep at your desk, well done. And if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to try my best to answer them. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Paula. That was super interesting. And I didn't feel asleep at all. It was very clear and interesting. Please, I think we are not too many people. So like if you have a question, just yeah, open your mic and go ahead. Or if you feel more comfortable writing it in the chat, you can also do that.
And I guess as well, for those people who may have very quietly, with the exception of Sally, God bless you, love, who may have fallen asleep or dozed off, just write down the questions. If you want to send them to Carolina, I'm sure she can forward them to me, or you can write them to me directly, and we can see what we can come up with.
Well, people think about it. I actually have a question,
Sure.
which may be more about the emotional value that we give to, for example, fish, and for coastal communities, especially people who use fish more for, just to feed their families than for selling. And then the values of the fish, like you were talking about how to convert from high GDP to low GDP, but sometimes the fish, even though the value might be quite low in the market, it is actually even more important because they are more dependent on fish. So I would like to hear how you factor in the dependency on a resource or an ecosystem into your calculations.
So at a very basic level, looking at the costs of alternatives is a really good example. Okay. So that gives you an order of magnitude. If you are doing a study an actual proper valuation, you can also go in and see, you know, what is the reliance of the community on this. So what it would give you is some kind of, it will give you a minimum value. And then you can talk about the food security implications. Because in order for a family to replace their more easily accessible inner reef fish, they may then actually have to hop on the back of someone's truck to get into town, take half a day off because of the distance, get the stuff, get it all the way back again, and then move on. So you're losing time as well as the freshness of the produce as well. So those things you can investigate. So getting these valuations will give you a starting point. But if you're going to do a full study, you can also look into them. And it becomes important then to look at the database and go to the source document and see what did they include, because some of those values will include these and some of them won't. So what do those values cover, and does that meet our needs?
Thank you. Kim, if you want to go, nice to see you.
Thanks, Monica. And thanks, Paula. I hope the bunnies are okay. I was just, kind of following up a bit more on that question from like the social point of view. Obviously, different. Maybe using that same example, a beach line or whatever, a coastal area. Different people. It's food. It's an important food source for some groups, right? Whereas other groups, yeah, it's a recreational area, right? Kind of thinking, okay, I'm definitely going to go and read the source. But any other kind of tips about, you know, thinking, you know, from a gender and equality and social inclusion perspective, how do you factor in the kind of social stuff? And then there's another question as well. Thanks.
Okay, so I think the question needs to be nested in where does the valuation fit in your decision-making process. So a lot of the times that people are doing environmental valuation is for things like cost-benefit analysis to say, well, you know, like, should we do some work to protect these mangroves, which is then going to have benefits in terms of our fisheries nursery and sustaining or maintaining our access to fish for the community, or not. And if we're doing it then, that's a really important time to be talking about those distributional dimensions. So we can look at the values and then say who experiences these values, who are the people making the sacrifices, you know, in order to make these things happen. Are they men? Are they women? Are there any minority groups out there? What are the impacts? So you can bring in the distributional and social dimensions at the valuation stage, but then they really kick in when we start doing things like cost-benefit analysis, because that's when they'll come to the fore. So you start off at the valuation, but it's normally valuation isn't just done for its own purposes. It's actually coming out in the dialogue that follows. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah. So, but we do frame it around that. I've got it. Yeah. And then this is just something that came across my desk the other day, looking at flood protection and catchments, river catchments and stuff. And I thought that this kind of this approach might be the way, but they are requesting more information about lost income. So that made me think about all these different other ways that we can, I guess, present these problems in monetary terms. How would you sort of say that one is like better than the other, or when to use these different alternatives?
Okay, so just in terms of things like lost income, that I had a slide quite early on the piece where I said, what is it we value? We value the benefits of the environment, and we also value the sacrifices that we make. So sacrifices include the amount of time that people spend doing something and their earnings. So we capture that in valuations, or we should be doing. No valuation is perfect, so you can bring them in there. I've forgotten the second part of your question. Forgive me, Kim. When it comes to choosing between the different approaches, that's really, I think, a time to actually bring in an economist just as an outsider. If you're working with a consultant and you're saying, look, I've seen all of these studies that have gone on in Fiji, this is really useful for us, can we do it? have that conversation with them, because the wide variety of approaches involves different types of maths, different types of time. If you're doing a survey-based valuation, they tend to be quite expensive. For my purposes, and it's my personal bias, I prefer valuations which are based on revealed preference. So how much do we spend to kind of put things back the way they were before we messed them up, that kind of approach. Because I think people get that. Whereas survey-based approaches, people can be a wee bit skeptical. So I would say talk about it with an economist about what is the problem you were what is the question you were trying to answer, and then take the approach after that. Going back to the source study is important to see if it's trying to answer the same questions that you were trying to answer. And sometimes there can be a whole bunch of studies tackling the same topic, and you'll have a range, and all of them might seem good. And that's great, because it gives you a direction. It's not going to answer it perfectly, but it gives you an order of magnitude to work from.
Fabulous. Thanks, Paul.
Sally?
Can you hear me okay, Paula?
You're so quiet. You're so quiet.
Oh, I'm very quiet. Gosh, now I feel like I'm shouting in the office.
Oh, no, I can hear you great.
Okay, I put the mic nearer to me. Sorry, I've probably spoken to you about this before, and it still grows on my mind. So some of the studies were done in Fiji for tourism. I don't know if you remember those studies that were done by Nicholas. I've forgotten his second name now. Yeah. So one of the problems that I was having and still have was when they're valuing, or in those studies, when they were valuing the value of the marine environment, they said they only value, for example, we know that tourists come to Fiji because of this image of pristine coral reefs and, pristine marine environment. But so that's what gets the bum on the seat on the aeroplane. But what he was saying is, but they would only value that tourist if they did an activity in the ocean, like they went diving. But to me, that doesn't demonstrate the value of the marine environment, because we know that people may not even, they may stay in their inclusive hotel and never step in, even step onto the shoreline. But we know what's the motivation for coming is this image that Fiji promotes of being this pristine marine environment. And I'm just wondering, is there any way that we can put the value on that, or is that just a no-no in economics?
Look, for all of the tourists, God bless them, who go to Denarau and say that they've done Fiji. Yes, I feel your pain, and I'm sure that any of our Fijian colleagues who are at the table are feeling your pain at this point. Now, there's a couple of things here. There are ways to do meta-analyses to actually be able to combine lots and lots of studies and actually tease out some kind of generic values. But you have to clean the data first. So bin the studies that don't actually talk to the kind of questions you have, and then give you indicative values. You can come out with some kind of averages or weighted averages and so on. What I would say as well is that using benefits transfer, cruising on the coattails of other people, can only be done in certain cases. And in some cases, you may literally be left with, okay, we're going to have to tackle this in a different way, either to do it yourself or to get someone to do some kind of study. So it's not going to work in all cases. Sometimes your questions will be so specific or your place is so unique that trying to extrapolate from somebody else's values is going to be quite heroic. So it's not going to work in all cases. But it is possible to do, like I say, kind of generalized studies and say, look, we actually have 24 studies in subtropical area or in tropical areas, which are similar to ours. This is the range of values, your average is this, but you need to really you need to understand the caveats that go around that. These are just crude orders, and we can only borrow from other people's studies because God bless them. they did those studies, and there may come a time where we have to do those studies too. So that isn't the answer you want to hear, Sally, but so sometimes we can, sometimes we can't.
No, that's fine. I'm not looking actually specifically at Fiji at the
No,
moment. It was just
no, but I
touching
understand your point.
marine spatial planning, like, you know, the value of tourism or all these other, you know, we can do offshore fisheries quite well. We struggle more with inshore fisheries, and then the other industries or other activities in the marine environment, when we're looking at from a marine spatial planning perspective of looking at, well, what is the, you know, and then looking at the trade-offs when you're zoning and things, it's sort of quite important to have studies around that or some clarity. But I guess it's just making the case of what you're studying and then the pros and cons of that.
What question specifically are you
Yeah.
trying to answer? Because the more precise your question, the more precise your answer. And then sometimes having a general answer, like I've given you general answers, and you're going, well, that doesn't really answer my question. And that's the problem with using somebody else's stuff as well. So there are times when you can do a meta-analysis and compare lots and lots of studies in the same kind of resources and the same kind of circumstances and look at the range and say, well, we can use this. And then there are times when it's just not going to be enough. Yeah. Simple places to start are how much money do we already spend as a nation or as a local government or as an NGO protecting these resources? That's the place to start. Start with what we know. Start with how much we already spend to protect these things or to manage these things or to keep it under control. And then think about valuations on top of that. If we're already spending truckloads of money to protect something, that's a really good starting point.
Oh, great. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you very